Mercedes haven't been shy in saying that they are glad to see the back of 2022 and especially the W13. I mean, let's be honest, they had the number 13 in the car's name, so they really should have seen this coming. However, I wouldn't say that 2022 was a total loss for Mercedes because I think the arrival of George Russell and how he hit the ground running is a massive positive for the team going forward. Before the season even started, I already thought that Mercedes had the strongest lineup on the grid, and even though I haven't done my driver lineup rankings video for 2023 yet, it won't be much of a spoiler or surprise to say that I still think Mercedes go into 2023 with the strongest driver lineup. In terms of just the stats, Russell finished 4th in the championship on 275 points, followed by Sainz and then Hamilton in 6th on 240. Now, many people were questioning when I did my top 5 best drivers of 2022 how I could put Lewis ahead of George if George beat him in the championship. Now, this is something that I've actually seen asked by quite a lot of people on other people's lists that also ranked Lewis ahead of George. And whilst I can't answer for those lists, the simplest way that I could summarize why I don't think the points tell the whole story and why I still think that Lewis was the better driver is that whilst I think that George Russell was the more consistent driver, I think that Lewis Hamilton was the faster driver and was able to extract the theoretical maximum more often out of the car. It's a similar story as to why I ranked Alonso over Ocon, despite Ocon outscoring Alonso over the course of 2022. Having said that, George Russell was absolutely phenomenal in terms of scoring points, and in the first 9 races up until Silverstone, he was the only driver on the grid to finish in the top 5 in every single race. That is the sort of consistency that Valtteri Bottas just didn't have against Lewis. The confidence that George will take away from beating Lewis, getting his first pole position, and getting his first Grand Prix win, regardless of the circumstances, is going to be immense. It puts to bed any doubts or lingering questions if he can compete against the best, and the next step will be seeing him under the pressure of a championship fight, which in itself is a whole different level. In terms of what George beating Lewis means for the Mercedes dynamic, I don't think it's quite the same, to me anyway, as when Leclerc came into Ferrari and in his first season beat Vettel and kind of kicked him out of Ferrari. In that example, Leclerc not only beat Vettel in terms of the points, but Leclerc was undoubtedly the faster driver as well. I mean, we forget, but Leclerc not only beat Vettel in qualifying, but he also ended the season as the driver with the most pole positions. The key difference in the Russell and Hamilton situation is that Hamilton still has the speed over Russell, and unlike at Ferrari, I don't think the team has lost faith in Hamilton in the same way that Ferrari did in Vettel. In fact, I think Toto and the team respect Lewis even more with the leadership and selflessness that he's shown. A lot has been made about the experiments Lewis did at the beginning of the season to help the team understand the W13. Now, how much you think that compromised Lewis at the beginning of the season, and if you think that's a valid reason for his early season slump, is open to your own interpretation. To me, the fact that he went out of his way to let the team use him as a guinea pig, and also more importantly, that he managed to show that he could bounce back mid-season when he had that run of 5 straight podiums, that to me showed that when circumstances were more normal, Lewis still had the edge over George. Now, the season for both drivers was far from smooth, and early on, I think for both Lewis and Toto, mentally it took them a few races to deal with and adjust to not having a car capable of race wins. For George, even though 2022 was disappointing, after Williams, anything, even a mediocre Mercedes, was always going to be a step up, and so the transition mentally seemed a lot easier for him, whilst with Lewis and Toto, I don't think it was easy mentally to go from challenging for race wins in every single season for the past 8 years to barely scraping podiums on a good day. But back to what I said earlier, did Lewis crumble mentally and let his new reality define him? No. Once he acclimatized and accepted that this is what 2022 is going to be, and it's about building for 2023, he got back to his absolute best, during that mid-season purple patch. On track for both Lewis and George, there were definitely road bumps and incidents which more than anything I think manifested from overdriving and pushing the W13 a little bit too much. I'm thinking of their double crash during qualifying in Austria, for example. Individually, both also had incidents as well. Lewis misjudging where Fernando was in Spa, and then making a mistake in tricky conditions in Singapore. And then also George, more than anything, I think not feeling confident with his car in wheel-to-wheel combat, which led to multiple incidents like colliding with Perez in France, clipping Sainz on lap 1 in Austin, and then his disastrous Singapore, which I think was just a bad day in the office all round. The dynamic between Lewis and George in 2023 will be very interesting to watch. I think there's a general feeling around F1 fans that Mercedes will return to at least winning races on a more regular basis with the W14, but in Formula 1, nothing is guaranteed. If Mercedes do go back to winning races and maybe challenging for titles, who will have the advantage between Lewis and George, and how the other driver will react will be a big test for them, and also the leadership of Toto Wolff. In a way, with George hitting the ground running so well, even in a mediocre Mercedes, it's kind of a double-edged sword because on one hand, hypothetically, if we get back to a 2021 scenario with Mercedes and Red Bull being equally matched, then having two drivers of that caliber should give them the advantage over a team like Red Bull. I rate Checo very highly, but if Max is pushed by both Lewis and George, he is going to have to raise his game even more, and I'm just not sure if he'll be able to do that. But at the same time, Mercedes know all too well what can happen when you have two drivers who are equally as fast, with wins and championships on the table. The respect and trust that the drivers have in that scenario, and the leadership of Toto Wolff to make sure that the respect and trust is maintained across the season, is going to be vital. Because if things do go wrong, then Max Verstappen, being the focal point of Red Bull, might be able to take advantage of any inter-team friction. For both drivers, I'm really looking forward to seeing how their partnership and rivalry as teammates develops. I still think that Lewis is the better driver because there's no substitute for raw speed, and especially in a championship situation, only Lewis and Max, in my opinion, have proved that they can be all-time great under the highest levels of pressure. At the same time, it doesn't matter how many championships you've won. Just like in any other sport, you've got to keep updating your resume and performing in the here and now. For George, he knows that if the opportunity to win the title is presented, he has got to capitalize on it and take it for himself. He proved in Sao Paulo that when the pressure is on, he is more than able to stand up to it and drive flawlessly to win a Grand Prix. But now, if given the car in 2023, the challenge will be proving and replicating that in every single race under levels of pressure that he has never felt before. 2022 was just the interlude of what's to come. It was a recalibration for everyone at the team. Next season will be the real test of who now is the number one. Hopefully we can see Mercedes back in the mix for race wins, because ideally, it would be a dream to have Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes all in the mix fighting for wins, with the best driver, the best team and the best car coming out on top. With the speed and championship pedigree that Lewis still has, and the confidence of a young and hungry George, who now knows that he can mix it up with the best, it's not 100% clear who the best driver will be at Mercedes in 2023. But it's gonna be a hell of a lot of fun to find out.